Okay guys, Timmy coming at you. Today I'm going to go over hormones. Just give you a basic overview of what a hormone is and what they do. So the definition is really, a hormone is a substance, typically a protein or a substance that contains protein, that's produced by one part of the body and then has its effect someplace else. Now, many hormones can affect the the total body, meaning it has effects on almost every cell of the body, and then some hormones are more specific. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But what I really want to do is I want to talk to you about the differences between what are referred to as steroid hormones and non-steroid hormones. Now, look, just so you know, not all steroid hormones are anabolic. Not all steroid hormones build protein. So there's a distinction, I think that's important. So steroid hormones, by definition, have in their chemical makeup cholesterol as their base. That's what really defines them as a steroid hormone. And then I listed some of the steroid hormones that you find in your body: the sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen, and then cortisol, the primary anti-inflammatory of the body, and then aldosterone. Now, if you remember looking at your book, cortisol is what's referred to as a glucocorticoid. So it affects metabolism and it affects blood sugar simply by raising it. It increases your blood sugar. Aldosterone is referred to as a mineral corticoid, meaning it affects sodium and potassium, and it also affects water. And we learned about that when we talked about the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. And then the non-steroid are basically proteins, and we know those are made of amino acids chemically bonded together. Just a real quick. Now look, for hormones to affect your body, the non-steroid hormones, they tend to increase the number of enzymes by binding to a specific cell membrane receptor. And then steroid hormones, they work by actually getting into the nucleus and binding to sites on DNA and then increasing a particular gene transcription, right? So making more of that particular gene, whatever that hormone does. So a couple of other things. Now, look, steroids are hormones in general are given in very, very small doses, not milligrams, but rather micrograms. And the reason for this is that they produce inside the cell a cascade of chemical reactions that have huge consequences downstream. So a hormone's gonna bind to a receptor, and it's not gonna just activate one enzyme, it's gonna activate a series of enzymes, and that's gonna create a huge increase in chemical reactions for that hormone which it's designed to produce. So that's important to remember too. And many of the effects of these hormones are not short-lived. They can last days or even weeks. So that's important to remember too. Now, what I really wanted to talk about was the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is referred to as the master gland, or what I like to call gland master P. And this is important. Most of the pituitary hormones do not have generalized effects on the body, but rather the hormones that are released by the pituitary gland will signal other glands of the body to release their hormones. Now that's really important. So anytime you have a pituitary problem, you are going to have significant hormonal problems. And how you remember the hormones that are released from the pituitary gland is this little acronym called GOLDFLAP. So, hey, there's Mini-Me. No, wait, that's, who is that? Well, you know who it is. Wee Man, there you go, from Jackass. Great movie. Should have won an Academy Award or something. Anyways, I digress. So let's look at the hormones. G, That stands for growth hormone or human growth hormone. And basically what growth hormone does is, as the name implies, it makes humans grow. And it has a powerful effect on the long bones of the body, stimulating those growth plates, those epiphyseal plates, to make bones grow longer. Human growth hormone is also involved in healing. That's why a lot of athletes, they don't necessarily take human growth hormone to get bigger and stronger, of which it does, but it speeds healing time. Now, next one, O, is oxytocin. And oxytocin is involved in popping that fetus out, right? So when the egg bird's head hits the cervix, it's going to stimulate pressure receptors, barrel receptors in the cervix, and that's going to signal the hypothalamus. And then the hypothalamus is going to begin the production of oxytocin. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are connected. And in response to egg bird's head bouncing against the cervix, the pituitary gland is going to release oxytocin. It's going to produce it, and then it's released by the posterior pituitary. And again, this is important. Any hormone that's produced by the hypothalamus is released from the posterior back portion of the pituitary gland. So that's oxytocin. The next one is A, and that is anti-diuretic hormone. Now, anti-diuretic hormone, as the name implies, we went over what a diuretic does. What a diuretic does is makes you pee. So if you're an anti-diuretic hormone, then it's going to make you not pee. So anti-diuretic hormone affects the kidneys and causes you to hold on to water, right? It reabsorbs water in the nephron. Excuse me. Holds on to water, right? And because the hypothalamus is involved in hunger, temperature, and thirst, anti-diuretic hormone is made in the hypothalamus and then released from the posterior pituitary. Then you have T. T is thyroid stimulating hormone. And as the name implies, thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone. So TSH is released from the anterior pituitary, and it will then stimulate the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone. So that's the goat and goat flap. Now let's look at the flap. All right. The F is follicle stimulating hormone. And follicle stimulating hormone is released from the anterior pituitary, and it's released, and it will tell the woman's ovaries to mature a follicle. So this starts the woman's, menstrual cycle, I guess you could say. Not necessarily the menstrual cycle, but the process of maturing follicles and then ovulating and releasing an egg. And we'll talk more about that when we get into male and female reproduction. So that's F. L is luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing hormone causes the follicle to rupture and release the egg. So luteinizing hormone is the ovulation hormone. Yeah, there you go, Timmy. The ovulation hormone. So right before a woman ovulates, you get this rise in luteinizing hormone in the blood, and that's going to stimulate the follicle rupture and release egg bird. And then you have A. A is adrenocorticotropic. Hang on. Hormone. Now, and that's abbreviated ACTH, and isn't it good that there is an abbreviation? ACTH is released from the anterior pituitary, and it's going to stimulate the cells of the adrenal cortex to release cortisol, DHEA, and a little bit of aldosterone. So ACTH, again, released from the anterior pituitary, and it's going to stimulate the cells of the adrenal cortex. So if you look, right, adrenal cort, that's adrenal cortex. Tropic means to stimulate. So that's what the adrenal corticotropic hormone does. It's released from the anterior pituitary, and it will stimulate the release of cortisol, DHEA, which is referred to as kind of the mother of all hormones. More on that later, and I'll talk more about that when we talk specifically about the hormones. And then finally, you have P, and P is prolactin. And prolactin, as the name implies, if you force something, right, you're pro, so you're for lactin. So what happens? Well, as the baby's about to pop out, you're going to have to feed that kid. That's a law. You got to feed your children. You should write that down. So when egg bird pops out, you got to feed them. So oxytocin is going to begin the production of milk, and then when the baby starts suckling to the nipple, that pressure in the nipple, that sensation of the baby suckling, is going to stimulate these little mechanoreceptors, these little receptors in the nipple, and that's going to stimulate the anterior pituitary to release prolactin. So what prolactin does is it begins the milk letdown, and assists with the ejection of milk from the nipple. All right. So those are the hormones. A basic overview of the hormones that are released by the pituitary gland. So a couple of things, right? Number one, most of the hormones that are released from the pituitary gland do not have generalized effects. They have specific effects, and the job of those hormones that are released by the pituitary gland are to stimulate other glands to release their hormones. That's why it's referred to as the master gland or gland master P. Here's the other thing, and this is important to remember. Not only do women have follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, but men do as well. And follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone in men, they're designed to start developing and then maturing sperm. So males have luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and it deals with mostly the development and maturation of sperm. So that's the basic overview of the hormones of the pituitary gland. Again, we'll get more specific as we move into the hormones. So this overview is designed for both my general and advanced anatomy classes, and I hope this helped.